Hi everyone. In this video, we're going to build a WireGuard VPN server right at home. This computer will act as our VPN server and will remain inside our local network. The server is connected to our router, which provides internet access for our home network. Over here, we have a remote device. It could be a laptop, a smartphone, or even a computer at the office. This device will have the WireGuard client installed. When the client connects, WireGuard creates a secure encrypted tunnel between the remote device and the server at home. Once this tunnel is established, the remote device can operate almost as if it were physically connected to your home network. This means you can access your home computer, use remote desktop, connect to your NAS, transfer files, manage your servers, or use other internal services without exposing multiple service ports directly to the internet. Before we get started, please prepare a text file like this. I'll put the template in the video description so you can copy it and customize it for your own environment. We'll use this file throughout the WireGuard configuration process. First, let's find the public IP address of our home network. To do this, open Command Prompt as an administrator. Next, run the following command to check the current public IP address of your network. Copy your public IP address into the text file. We'll use this information in the next steps. For the domain field, we'll configure it later in the advanced section at the end of this video, so you can ignore it for now. Now, let's start installing the WireGuard VPN server on this Windows computer. For this server, we'll first configure a static IP address to ensure that it always uses the same address on the local network. Open Control Panel and navigate to the Network settings. This is the current IP address that was automatically assigned by DHCP. However, I'm going to configure a new static IP address for this server, as long as it's in the same network and isn't already being used by another device. Please note that your network may be different from mine, so make sure to adjust the settings to match your own environment. Next, we'll install and configure WireGuard to turn this computer into a WireGuard VPN server. To get started, visit the official WireGuard website and download the latest installer. Once the download is complete, go ahead and install it just like any other application. The installation process only takes a few seconds. Once the installation is complete, WireGuard will automatically launch. From here, click Add Tunnel and then select Add Empty Tunnel to create a new VPN configuration. For this profile, we'll name it Server, since this will be the configuration used by our WireGuard VPN server. Next, copy this public key into the text file that we prepared earlier. Once everything is configured, go ahead and save the profile we just created. Next, we'll repeat the same steps to create another profile. We'll name this profile Client, since this configuration will be used by remote devices to connect to our WireGuard VPN server. Next, copy the client's public key and save it in the text file that we prepared earlier. Once that's done, save this configuration file. At this point, we have two profiles, one for the server and one for the client. Next, select the server profile and click Edit to start configuring our WireGuard VPN server. This is the configuration section for our WireGuard VPN server. This line specifies the listening port for the WireGuard VPN server. By default, WireGuard uses port 51820. Next, this line defines the server's address within the VPN network that we're creating. You can use a different IP range if you prefer, as long as it doesn't conflict with any networks you're already using. Next, this section is used to define a client. And this section is for a second client. If you have multiple devices connecting to your WireGuard VPN server at the same time, we'll come back to this part and create additional client profiles later in the video. Now, for client 1, enter the public key that we copied earlier. In this section, this line defines the VPN address for client 1. Please note that this address must match the one that we'll configure in the client 1 profile later on. Now, copy the entire configuration section for the server from the text file that we prepared earlier, and then paste it into the profile that we're currently editing. Then, click Save to save the configuration that we just created. Alright, we've now finished configuring the server profile. Next, let's move on to editing the configuration for client 1. And this is the configuration that we'll add to the profile for client 1. In this section, please note that the VPN address defined here must match the address that we configured for client 1 in the server profile. And this line specifies the DNS server that will be used when the client is connected through the VPN. And this line tells the client to route all network traffic through the VPN tunnel once the connection is established. Next, enter the server's public key that we copied earlier into this field. This means that the server's public key is configured on the client, and the client's public key is configured on the server. This is the mechanism that allows both devices to identify and authenticate each other before establishing the VPN connection. Next, in the endpoint field, enter the server's public IP address and port 51820. This is the address that the client will use to connect to the WireGuard server. Then, copy the entire configuration section for client 1 and paste it into the profile that we're currently editing. For the client profile, make sure to enable the Block Untunneled Traffic option. Then, click Save to save the configuration. Alright, we now have fully configured profiles for both the server and the client, and everything is ready for the next step. Next, we'll export the profiles that we just created so they can be used on other devices. After exporting, we'll get a compressed file. Extract it to access the configuration files inside. Go ahead and delete the server configuration file. We only need to keep the client configuration file for use on remote devices. Then, go back to the WireGuard interface, delete the client profile, and keep only the server profile on this machine. Alright, now let's activate the server profile and turn this computer into a WireGuard VPN server. Next, let's go back to the network settings, as there are a few more configurations we need to make before the client can connect to the server. At this point, you'll notice a new network adapter has appeared. This is the virtual network adapter created by WireGuard. However, this adapter isn't ready to use just yet. We still need to configure connection sharing so that traffic from the VPN clients can access the internet through this server. On the Sharing tab, enable this option to allow VPN clients to use the server's internet connection. Once it's done, you'll see the network adapter displaying the shared status. This indicates that internet connection sharing has been configured successfully. Next, since our server is located behind a router, we need to open UDP port 51820 and forward it to the WireGuard server so that clients on the internet can connect to it. To get started, access your router's management interface using an administrator account. Depending on your router model, look for features such as firewall, NAT, port forwarding, or virtual server to configure port forwarding. Then, click Add to create a new port forwarding rule. In the port field, enter 51820. This is the default port that we configured earlier on the WireGuard VPN server. In the local IP address field, enter the LAN IP address that we assigned to the WireGuard VPN server earlier. Then, click Save to save the port forwarding rule that we just created. Once it's created, you'll see a new rule like this. That means the port forwarding configuration has been set up successfully. Alright, at this point, your WireGuard VPN server is fully configured and ready to accept connections from clients. Now, to test the connection, we'll copy the client configuration file to another computer and try connecting to the VPN. Now, let's switch over to the client machine. Copy the configuration file that we created earlier to this computer so we can test the VPN connection. Next, just like we did on the server, visit the official WireGuard website and download the latest installer. Once the download is complete, go ahead and install it just like any other application. The installation only takes a few seconds. On the main screen, all we need to do now is click Import Tunnel to import the configuration file that we created earlier. At this point, you'll see that all of the information we previously configured in the client profile has been imported automatically. Now, all we need to do is click Activate to start connecting to the WireGuard VPN server. If everything is working correctly, the status will change to active. At the same time, the transfer counters will start increasing, indicating that data is being exchanged between the client and the WireGuard VPN server. Next, open a command prompt window so we can verify that the VPN connection has been established successfully. Next, ping the VPN address of the server that we configured earlier to verify that the client can successfully reach the server. If you get a result like this, it means that the client has successfully connected to the WireGuard VPN server, and the two devices can now communicate through the VPN tunnel. Now, let's switch back to the WireGuard VPN server and check the connection status from the server side. When a client connects, you'll see its information under the Peer section, along with data transfer statistics and the latest connection time. Alright, that's it. Now if you want additional devices, such as PCs, laptops, or smartphones to connect to your WireGuard VPN server, we'll go ahead and create a profile for a second client. Just like in the previous steps, we'll generate a public key for client 2 and use it in the configuration process. Now, go back to the WireGuard interface and create another profile for client 2. Next, copy this public key into the text file that we prepared earlier so it's easier to use during the configuration process. Next, in the configuration for client 2, assign a dedicated VPN address to this client. Make sure that this address is not already being used by another client. Next, enter the server's public key and the server's public IP address that we prepared earlier. Then, copy this entire configuration section and paste it into the profile that we created for Client 2. Then, click Save to save the configuration for Client 2. Next, temporarily deactivate the server profile, as we still need to add the Client 2 information to the WireGuard VPN Server configuration. Next, remove the commented lines, then enter the public key for Client 2 and the VPN address that we previously assigned to this client. Once you're done, click Save to save the configuration. And that's it. We've successfully created the profile for Client 2 and added it to the WireGuard VPN Server configuration. Finally, simply export the Client 2 profile just as we did with Client 1. Once the export is complete, go ahead and remove the Client 2 profile from the server and keep only the server profile. Alright, next, let's address a very common issue when hosting a VPN at home: dynamic public IP addresses. When that happens, you would need to update the connection settings on all of your client devices. To solve this, we'll use a dynamic DNS service that always keeps a fixed domain name pointing to the server's current public IP address, even if the IP changes over time. In this example, I'll be using NoIP to create a dynamic DNS hostname for our WireGuard VPN server. If you don't have a NoIP account yet, click Sign Up and create one before continuing. Once you've completed the registration, sign in with the NoIP account that you just created. From the main dashboard, go to Manage DNS to create a dedicated dynamic DNS hostname for our WireGuard VPN server. Next, enter the hostname you'd like to use for your WireGuard VPN server, and then select a suitable domain suffix. In the IP field, the system will typically populate your current public IP address automatically, so you can usually leave this value as is. Once it's created, you'll see the new hostname appear in the list like this. To verify it, open a command prompt window and test whether this hostname resolves correctly. Here, ping the hostname that you just created to verify that it resolves to the correct public IP address. If you get a result like this, it means that the dynamic DNS hostname has been configured successfully. Next, go back to your router's management interface. Depending on your router model, look for features such as Dynamic DNS, DDNS, or DNS Service to configure Dynamic DNS. Next, select NoIP as the service provider, then enter your hostname, username, and password so that the router can automatically update your public IP address whenever it changes. Then, click Save to save the configuration. From this point on, the router will automatically update your hostname with the latest public IP address whenever it changes. From this point on, for your client profiles, simply use the dynamic DNS hostname instead of the public IP address in the endpoint field. Even if your home's public IP changes, your clients will still be able to connect normally. Alright, now let's switch back to the client machine and verify that everything still works correctly when using our dynamic DNS hostname. You can also edit the configuration directly here without re-importing the configuration file. Simply replace the public IP address with the dynamic DNS hostname that we just created. If you see the values in the transfer field increasing, it means that the WireGuard VPN tunnel has been established successfully and data is being transmitted through it. And that's it. If you'd like to set up WireGuard client on other platforms, such as Ubuntu, CentOS, Linux Mint, or on Android and iPhone, I've already created detailed tutorials for those as well, so feel free to check them out. Thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.